I sat at that long oak table while my mother raised her glass and beamed. Your brother's wedding was flawless. The whole family laughed, their eyes sliding toward me like I was the leftover no one wanted. Someone joked, "When will it be your turn? You're nothing but used material." My hands trembled, but my smile didn't break. I let them laugh, then I dropped the words like a knife. It already happened. You just weren't invited. The laughter died on their lips, silence pressing in. What none of them knew was that my secret wasn't the only one waiting. When you grow up in a family that worships perfection, you learn early which roles are available and which ones are already taken. My brother Ethan was the golden boy from the moment he could hold a baseball bat. His trophies lined the mantel, gleaming cups and medals polished every Sunday. My mother would guide visitors straight to them, her voice swelling with pride. "Ethan's been busy," she'd say, and she meant it as proof that our family story was unfolding exactly as she wanted. My name rarely made it into those stories. At Christmas, when she typed up her annual holiday letter on heavy cream stationery, Ethan's grades, promotions, girlfriends, and trips filled paragraphs. I usually got one line, "Marin keeps busy with her projects." No mention of the mural I painted on the side of the community center or the grant I won to run art programs at the middle school. Just projects like my life was a messy pile shoved into the corner. But what stung wasn't just the omissions, it was the ease with which they erased me. My mother's smile never faltered, her silver bracelets jingling as she set the table for Thanksgiving, making sure Ethan sat at the head, his stories carrying through the room while mine disappeared into the clink of dishes. My father, quiet and steady, rarely corrected her. He hid in silence, sipping his coffee, nodding along. I think part of me always hoped he saw more, that behind his silence, he kept something for me. But when you're constantly overlooked, hope feels like a dangerous habit. That night in Bend at the oak table, it was the same. My mother's voice was syrupy with pride when she declared Ethan's wedding flawless. The mountain backdrop, the string quartet, the choreographed toasts, it was her masterpiece. The rest of the family joined in, replaying the moments, laughing at inside jokes from a night I wasn't invited to. They didn't notice my hand tightening on the napkin in my lap, or maybe they did and enjoyed it. It wasn't the first time they'd staged a performance without me. Months before, when the wedding invitations went out, I checked my mailbox every day, convinced an embossed envelope must be waiting. When it never came, I finally asked. My mother's tone was airy, dismissive. "We assumed you'd be busy with work, dear. School schedules are impossible," Ethan chimed in. Too smooth as ever. "We thought it might be complicated you bringing someone." They spoke as if my absence had been a courtesy, a favor. The neatness of their excuses hurt worse than a blunt rejection. The truth, I had married Jonah 6 months before in a courthouse ceremony with only 2 witnesses and a bouquet wrapped in butcher paper. My mother knew. I'd sent her a photo of us mid-laugh, my veil blowing in the wind, Jonah's arms steady around my waist. She never answered. My father never called. The silence was louder than words. It was their way of saying, "This doesn't fit our story, so it doesn't exist." That's why when my cousin leaned across the table in Bend and grinned, "So Marin, when's your turn?" I didn't flinch. When Ethan's best man smirked and muttered about used material, I kept my glass steady. I'd learned their favorite stage was my silence. But that night, I broke the script. "I'm already married," I said. 4 words, calm, even deliberate. They didn't just fall into the room, they detonated. Forks froze. My mother blinked as though she hadn't heard right. Ethan's wife shifted in her seat. My father cleared his throat, but said nothing. It was the first time I'd watched my family lose control of their own narrative, and for a split second, I tasted freedom. What they didn't know then, and what you're about to find out, is that my secret marriage was just the beginning. Because the deeper betrayal wasn't about a wedding left unmentioned, it was about what they were willing to steal next, even from the most vulnerable person in the room. 2 days after that dinner in Bend, my father sent me a short email. Just 5 words, "Can we talk? Just us." I stared at it for a long time, my cursor blinking like it was daring me to hit delete. For years, his silence had been the glue holding my mother's control in place. But curiosity tugged at me, so I wrote back, "Tomorrow." Fuller's Coffee, 10 a.m. The next morning, I slid into the red vinyl booth across from him. The place smelled of bacon grease and burnt espresso, a diner that hadn't changed in decades. He looked older than I remembered, his shoulders, slumped hair thinner. He reached into his coat and pulled out an envelope. Inside was the photo I had mailed months earlier, the one of Jonah and me on our courthouse wedding day. The edges were worn, creased like it had been unfolded and refolded too many times. "I couldn't throw it away," he said quietly. "Your mother said it was disrespectful, but it looked real. And I wanted to keep one thing that was yours." For a moment, I couldn't speak. My throat tightened. I had wanted so badly to believe someone in that house saw me. "Is he good to you?" my father asked, his voice rough. "Yes," I said firmly, "better than being invisible." He nodded but didn't promise change, didn't vow to stand up for me. He just sat there, his coffee cooling his silence, too practiced to break. That's when I realized something: my mother's erasures weren't accidents. They were choices. And my father's quiet wasn't ignorance. It was compliance. A week later, a cream-colored envelope leaned against my apartment door in Portland. The family crest embossed in gold at the corner, no return address. My stomach dropped before I even opened it. Inside was the wedding album, Ethan's big day, preserved in glossy pages and scripted captions. At first, it was predictable: the lakeside ceremony, the rehearsal dinner, the perfect smiles. But then I froze on the family portrait. Everyone was arranged in careful rows. And there, standing between Ethan and my parents, was a dark-haired woman in a dress similar to mine. Not me, but close enough to fool someone glancing quickly. Beneath her face, in elegant calligraphy, was my name, Maren Ellis. My breath caught. My knees went weak. They hadn't just left me out, they had written me back in using someone else's body. Jonah walked in from the kitchen, drying his hands on a towel. He saw the page over my shoulder and his jaw tightened. "They replaced you," he said, his voice low. "That means they knew you mattered." I wanted his words to comfort me, but they scraped raw. If I mattered, why erase me at all? Why build a lie so carefully that it required a stand-in? My fingers shook as I closed the album, pressing the pages together like I could smother the insult inside. The next morning, I carried the package down the block to the blue mailbox on the corner. Across the gold crest, I had scrawled one word in thick, black marker: return. No explanations, no softening, just the truth they had tried to edit out, sent back to them like a verdict. When the envelope clanged against the metal inside, the sound was sharper than I expected. Final, unforgiving. That evening, my inbox lit up with a message from my mother. The subject line: "You blindsided us." Her words were clipped, rehearsed, accusing. She said I had humiliated the family at dinner, that Ethan's wife was heartbroken, that there was no need for a scene. I read the lines twice, searching for even a trace of curiosity about why I'd been silent so long. There was none. 2 hours later, Ethan posted on social media a picture of him and his bride raising glasses at Sun River. The caption, "Real love shows up." Comments flooded in congratulations, heart emojis, applause. It wasn't for me. It never had been. I shut my laptop and sat in the quiet. My chest burned, but not with tears. Those had run out months ago. No, this was something else, a steady heat climbing from my stomach into my throat. Rage, yes, but also clarity. That's when I remembered her grandma Ruth, my mother's own mother, 82 years old, living alone in the old farmhouse on the edge of town. She was the only person who had ever called me special without a trace of irony. When I was a kid, she saved my drawings, taping them to her fridge, telling anyone who visited my granddaughter's an artist. She never compared me to Ethan, never measured me against a list of accomplishments. To her, I was already enough. I hadn't spoken to her in months. My mother often managed those calls, making sure I wasn't alone with Grandma too long. That night, on impulse, I picked up the phone and dialed her number. She answered on the second ring, her voice soft but steady. "Maren, honey, is that you?" Something in me cracked at the sound. I told her everything: the dinner in Bend, the replacement in the album, the email from my mother. She was quiet for a long moment, then sighed. "They've been using me too," she said finally. I frowned. "What do you mean?" "They want me to sign papers. They say it's for convenience, to manage my accounts, to help with bills. but I don't see why Ethan and your mother need access to every dollar I've saved. I told them no, but they keep pushing." Her words landed like a punch, my hands clenched into fists. This wasn't just about erasing me from photos or letters. This was about money, about control, about exploiting the one person in the family who still mattered to me. "Don't sign anything," I said quickly, my voice sharper than I intended. "Promise me, Grandma, not until we figure this out." She hesitated, then whispered, "I won't. Not if you're with me." That night I sat by the window of my apartment, Portland streetlights glowing in rows. I could feel the fuse that had been burning inside me for years, finally catching flame. My family thought they could silence me, replace me, erase me. But this was different. They weren't just rewriting me anymore. They were coming for her. And I knew then I wasn't going to stay silent. Not this time. Grandma Ruth didn't sound like herself when I visited her the following weekend. She was sitting at the kitchen table in her farmhouse, a plate of untouched toast in front of her. The lace curtains fluttered in the breeze, carrying the faint smell of lavender from her garden, but she didn't look out the window. She just kept staring at a stack of documents resting near her elbow. "They brought these over yesterday," she said, her voice trembling as she pushed the papers toward me. "Power of attorney joint accounts, all kinds of things I don't understand. Your mother said it was just to keep things simple. But Marin, I've kept my own checkbook balance since I was 16. Why now?" I flipped through the pages, my stomach tightening. Legal language sprawled across each line, thick with clauses meant to confuse. Buried inside was exactly what I feared if she signed. She'd hand over control of everything she owned: her house, her savings, her future. My chest ached. I looked at her fragile hands resting on the table, the veins blue against paper-thin skin. These were the hands that had braided my hair for school-needed bread on Sunday mornings, clipped roses in her yard, and now those same hands were trembling under the weight of betrayal. "Grandma," I whispered, my throat raw. "They're trying to take everything from you." Her eyes watered, but she nodded like she already knew. I thought maybe I was just being paranoid, but hearing it from you, it makes sense. I always wondered why they were so eager to plan Ethan's wedding here while telling me not to worry about costs. The rage that had been smoldering inside me snapped into focus. This wasn't only about me being invisible or erased from photos. This was elder abuse, financial exploitation. It had a name, and it was illegal. That night, back at my apartment, I searched until my eyes blurred. Page after page of state laws, articles, forums filled with stories of sons and daughters draining their parents' accounts. Elder financial abuse, the words glowed on the screen. It was like a cold knife of recognition. I wasn't crazy. Grandma wasn't crazy. We weren't alone. I clicked on a hotline number listed at the bottom of one article, and before I could lose my nerve, dialed. A woman answered with a calm, steady voice. I poured the story out in jagged pieces: the album, the dinner in Bend, the documents, the pressure. She listened without interrupting, then said firmly, "You're right to be concerned. Don't let her sign anything. Get a lawyer now." The next morning, I walked into a downtown Portland law office, my palms sweating. The receptionist's smile was polite but distant until I explained why I was there. Her expression shifted instantly, and within minutes, I was sitting across from a lawyer named Angela Park. Angela was sharp-eyed, mid-40s, with a voice that carried weight without needing to rise. She spread the documents across her desk, skimming them quickly, her mouth tightening. "This is textbook," she said. "If your grandmother signs these, she loses control of everything. Whoever prepared this knew exactly what they were doing." I clenched my fists. My mother and brother brought them. They want her money, her house. Angela nodded. "Then we'll stop them. Here's the plan. First, we'll draft a cease and desist letter. That puts them on notice that any attempt to coerce her is illegal. Next, we'll prepare a protective petition so the court recognizes her autonomy. And when they come back from their honeymoon, we'll serve them in public. People like this hide behind appearances, so we'll tear the mask off in front of everyone." Her words sent a shiver through me. part fear, part exhilaration. For years, my silence had been my armor. Now I was sharpening it into a weapon. That weekend, I returned to Grandma's farmhouse with the letter. She read it slowly, her lips pressing tight. When she finished, she set it down and looked at me. "Maren," she said, her voice steady. "I don't want a war, but I also won't be erased. If you'll stand with me, I'll sign." I took her hand, squeezing gently. "I'm not going anywhere." The next 2 weeks were strangely quiet. Ethan and my mother were still abroad, posting endless photos from their honeymoon in Greece. Beaches, wine glasses, captions dripping with perfection. Meanwhile, Grandma and I waited. Each day she moved through her routines, watering her roses, kneading bread, humming softly. But there was a tension in her shoulders that hadn't been there before. Sometimes I caught her standing by the window, watching the driveway as if expecting them to appear. At night, I lay awake rehearsing what I'd say when the moment came. I imagined their faces when the papers were served, the shock, when they realized the narrative was no longer theirs to control. Fear mixed with anticipation twisting in my chest like a knot tightening with each day. Finally, Angela called. "They're back. Tomorrow morning, their flight lands at PDX. Be there. I'll handle the rest." I hung up, my heart pounding. Tomorrow. After years of silence, of being overlooked, of swallowing my words until they soured inside me, tomorrow I would stand. That night, Grandma sat with me on her porch as the sun set over the fields. Fireflies flickered in the tall grass, and the air smelled faintly of lilac. She reached over and squeezed my hand. "I'm proud of you," she whispered. "You're braver than I ever was." I swallowed hard, blinking back tears. "No," I said softly. "I just learned it from you." We sat there until the sky turned dark, neither of us speaking, both of us waiting. The war we hadn't asked for was coming, and this time I wasn't going to retreat. When I finally lay down to sleep, I dreamed of airport halls filled with the echo of rolling suitcases, faces turning, voices rising. I woke before dawn, my chest tight with anticipation. Tomorrow the mask would crack. Tomorrow they would learn that the story they thought they controlled was already slipping from their hands. And I was ready. Airports have their own kind of hum, a mix of rolling suitcases, boarding calls, and voices layered over voices. That morning at Portland International, I heard every sound twice as loud, my nerves sharpening each detail. Grandma Ruth sat beside me in the waiting area, her hands folded tight over her purse. Angela, our lawyer, stood a few feet away, calm and composed in a navy suit. She looked like she'd walked into battlefields before and already knew how this one would end. I kept scanning the arrivals board until Ethan's flight blinked from in air to arrived. My throat went dry. This was it. Years of silence, erasure, humiliation, all funneling into the narrow space between baggage claim and the sliding glass doors. We didn't wait long. Ethan and my mother appeared at the top of the escalator, sunburned and smug-wheeling shiny suitcases. Ethan's wife trailed behind, scrolling her phone. My mother spotted us first. Her step faltered, but she recovered quickly, pasting on that tight smile she used when neighbors were watching. Ethan's gaze slid over me like I was a stranger. "Maren." My mother said, her tone sharp with surprise. "What are you doing here?" I stood, heart hammering, but my voice was steady. "Waiting for you." Angela stepped forward before they could react, a thick envelope in her hand. She held it out to my mother. "Mrs. Ellis, you've been formally served. This is a cease and desist regarding financial coercion of Ruth Ellis. You are hereby notified that any further attempts to gain access to her accounts will be considered elder financial abuse under state law." The words hit harder than I expected. My mother's mouth opened, then closed again, her face blanching as she took the papers. Ethan stepped forward, his jaw tightening. "What is this?" he barked. "Some kind of stunt." Angela didn't flinch. "It's not a stunt. It's the law. You and your mother pressured Ruth Ellis into signing over her assets. She refused. Any future attempts will have consequences." People around us were starting to stare. Travelers slowed their steps, eyes flicking toward the confrontation. My mother's perfect mask was cracking right there under fluorescent lights and the smell of coffee from the nearby kiosk. Ethan sneered, "You think you can humiliate us here?" In public, I stepped forward, finally letting years of swallowed words pour out. "No, Ethan. You humiliated yourself when you erased me from your wedding, when you took Grandma's trust and tried to turn it into a checkbook for your lifestyle, when you decided appearances mattered more than people." His face reddened. "You've always been jealous." Jealous. My laugh was sharp, bitter, of being invisible, of sending a wedding photo you pretended not to see, of watching you replace me in an album like I was disposable. "No, Ethan, I'm not jealous, I'm done." The crowd was listening now, a circle of strangers pretending not to watch, but hanging on every word. My mother's hands shook as she clutched the envelope. "This is unnecessary," she hissed. "We were only trying to help. Your grandmother can't manage everything alone." Grandma's voice, small but clear, cut through the tension. "I've been balancing my accounts longer than you've been alive. Don't you dare call it help when what you wanted was control." For the first time, my mother faltered. Her eyes flicked to the onlookers, desperate to salvage her image, but the words were out. The script she'd written for years had burned in an instant, exposed under the bright airport lights. Ethan reached for the papers in her hand, muttering, "We'll fight this." Angela's voice sharpened. "Go ahead. We've already filed the petition. The court date is set. If you want to explain your behavior to a judge instead of your neighbors, that's your choice." Silence rippled through the space, heavier than the rolling suitcases and echoing announcements. My mother finally turned to me, her face pale, her voice stripped of charm. "You did this." I met her gaze without flinching. "No. You did this when you decided I didn't count. When you decided Grandma's savings mattered more than her dignity. This isn't revenge, Mom. It's protection." Her lips pressed tight, and for once she had no script, no quick retort, no practiced smile. She looked small, almost fragile, in the middle of baggage claim. Ethan beside her shifted uneasily, his bluster thinning in the face of a tension he couldn't control. Grandma slipped her hand into mine, her grip firmer than I expected. "Let's go home, Marin," she whispered. But I wasn't finished. Not yet. I turned to Ethan, my voice carrying so everyone nearby could hear. "You called me used material, leftover. You thought silence meant weakness. But here's the truth. You can't erase someone who refuses to disappear." He froze, his jaw clenched, but he didn't speak. Not with so many eyes on him, not with the law pressing down in Angela's steady hands. We walked out together, me, Grandma, Angela, leaving them standing by the luggage carousel, their perfect story unraveling in front of strangers. The glass doors slid open, and cool morning air rushed over us sharp with jet fuel and rain. For the first time in years, my shoulders felt light. On the ride back, Grandma squeezed my hand again. "You gave me my voice back," she said softly. I shook my head, eyes stinging. "You never lost it. They just stopped listening. Now they don't get to decide anymore." That night, when I finally lay down, exhaustion pressed into every bone. But underneath it was something new, a sense of justice, raw and imperfect, but real. For once, I wasn't replaying what I should have said or what I could have done. I had spoken, and the silence that followed was theirs, not mine. The next day, headlines would never carry our names. Social media wouldn't care. But in that small, crowded corner of an airport, my family's empire of perfection had cracked. And once cracks appear, they never fully disappear. The fight wasn't over. Court was still coming. But for the first time, I felt ready. They had underestimated me for the last time. Courtrooms don't look like they do on TV. No soaring drama, no gavel slamming down. Just beige walls, stiff benches, and a faint buzz from the fluorescent lights. Still, when the judge read the ruling, it felt louder than thunder. The documents my mother and Ethan had pushed in front of Grandma were declared void. The accounts and property stayed under her name, protected. And more than that, the court restricted their access, cutting off any future attempts to control her finances. I glanced sideways at my mother. Her lips were tight, her jaw working like she was chewing gravel. Ethan sat rigid, his tie crooked, his eyes dark with anger. For once, Neither of them spoke. They couldn't charm, dismiss, or twist their way out of this. The law had spoken and it hadn't sided with them. When we walked out of the courthouse, Grandma let out a long breath, the kind she'd been holding for months. She leaned on my arm, but her steps were lighter. I thought I'd lost everything, she whispered. Not the money, them. My own children. I hugged her gently. They chose what mattered to them. But you're not alone anymore. She smiled faintly, the lines around her eyes softening. Thanks to you. Back at her farmhouse, she returned to her routines, but something had shifted. She clipped roses and placed them in a mason jar on the kitchen table, humming as she moved. She baked bread again, the smell filling the house like it used to. The heaviness in her shoulders had lifted. It wasn't about winning money, it was about keeping her dignity, her independence. For me, the shift was different. One evening, I walked along the Willamette Esplanade with Jonah. The river caught the glow of city lights bridges shimmering on the surface. I slipped a hand into my coat pocket and felt the courthouse photo still folded but intact. For months it had been proof of love defiance, a life I refused to let them erase. But now it meant something else. It was a reminder that silence doesn't protect you. It only gives others permission to write your story for you. I told Jonah I was thinking of applying to a nonprofit that fought elder abuse. Maybe even going back to school for social work. I don't want anyone else to feel the way Grandma did, I said, or the way I did. He squeezed my hand, his thumb brushing the inside of my palm. Then that's where you're meant to be. Weeks passed. Ethan sent me a clipped message full of blame, accusing me of betrayal, of destroying the family's reputation. My mother wrote once a bare subject line, "Ready to talk when you are." But there was no apology, no acknowledgement of what they'd done. Just another attempt to pull me back on their terms. I didn't answer right away. Instead, I focused on the circle I had built, the friends who showed up at our backyard with pies and lemonade, the neighbors who asked about Grandma's garden, the students who sent photos of murals they were painting. That was family too, maybe the truest kind. Still, one moment lingers in me. At Grandma's table, weeks after the court ruling, she slid a small tin box across to me. Inside was a stack of my childhood drawings, crayon portraits, sketches of houses, messy attempts at flowers. She'd saved them all. "You thought you were invisible," she said, her voice warm. "But I saw you. Always." Tears blurred my vision. I pressed the box to my chest, feeling the weight of it, not just paper, but proof that I had never been as erased as they wanted me to believe. Justice doesn't erase pain. It doesn't rewrite years of silence or neglect, but it can carve out space for something new, space to breathe, to grow, to belong, without begging for permission. Sometimes I still think of that night in Bend, the oak table, the laughter swelling around me. I used to replay it with shame, wondering if I should have stayed quiet. Now I see it differently. That was the night the fuse burned all the way down. The night I stopped retreating. The night I chose to fight back. And if you've ever felt like the invisible one at the table, I want you to hear this. You're not powerless. You're not disposable. You get to choose your story, even if it means tearing up the script your family wrote for you. Looking back now, I realize betrayal doesn't always come with shouting or slam doors. Sometimes it shows up in silence, in omissions, in the careful editing of who belongs and who doesn't. My mother and Ethan thought they could erase me, and when that failed, they tried to erase Grandma too. But the truth has a way of pushing through, no matter how many glossy albums or forged signatures you stack on top of it. Justice wasn't loud. It didn't make headlines. But it came in a courtroom in a cracked mask at baggage claim and the small, steady voice of a grandmother refusing to be erased. And that's what stays with me, not the humiliation, not even the anger, but the strength that rose when we finally stood up. If you've ever had to protect someone you love or protect yourself from your own family, know this: you're not alone. Your voice matters, even if they don't want to hear it. If this story hit you in the gut, share it in the comments. Hit subscribe so you won't miss the next one. And remember, sometimes the most powerful revenge is simply refusing to disappear.